All right, welcome back to the House Environment Committee. We're going to continue taking testimony on each of S-325. And we welcome Charlie Baker.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for the time. And I know this is getting somewhere near the end. I think you know better than I do. So apologies. I have not been following your testimony in every conversation. So if I've missed something, please, I apologize in advance. And here really saw a new version yesterday, 3.2 dated yesterday. And I guess I should start by saying I think the RPCs are very thankful for the work the committee's doing and support just about everything in here. There were two new provisions that were added yesterday that we do have more significant concerns about. And they were, sorry to dive in so quickly on issue, but on page, and they're around the historic requirements for village centers. And I will say all the RPCs are quite concerned about them. And I'll tell you why, but the two provisions I'm speaking about are on page 16, lines 11 to 14, highlighted in yellow. Thank you, Ellen, I'm guessing. And then also page 25, lines 9 to 10. So those were two things that were added, and we're quite concerned because they're conflicting with what we had understood intent to be. And I'm sorry, I'm going to take you into the weeds a little bit, and then you should pull me out.
Oh, we appreciate this. We need.
The centers program, the designation program, there's 3 levels of centers. Downtown, there's step 3 centers, the biggest ones. And then for smaller village centers, it was separated into 2 types of centers, step 1 and step 2. Step 2, and it's unfortunate you don't see the whole statute. So if you saw like the next paragraph that's after the section on page 25, you would see step 2 says requires historic or eligibility for the National Register of Historic Places.
Step 2
Or
requires.
step 2. And so these changes, from our understanding, is kind of having the effect of turning step 1 centers into the equivalent of step 2 centers. Because we have been operating since the law passed, and frankly, working with the LURB and working with DHCD and VNRC and Preservation Trust, with the understanding that it would be okay to have non-historic centers. And let me give you a few examples. We have certainly towns that are looking to move their centers out of floodplains. And so that's going to be a non-historic center. And then we have other ones. Sorry, I'm from Chittenden County. I should have apologized for that first. But like in the New North End of Burlington, if you're familiar with that, like that was a neighborhood built in the 50s. The center of it is a shopping center, essentially. It's not a historic place, but it is a center of that community. And there are other ones like that around the state. And so all of our mapping that we've been working on for the last year and a half, some of us longer, some of us more recently working on those maps, have centers that this would disqualify from being mapped as step 1 centers. And so we hope that there's some possibility of taking this out. We honestly, before this version came out, I thought we were testifying and say, yay, we're done, great job. And then these 2 centers seem to kind of take us backwards. And so it is a significant concern for us. And just to be clear about the benefits, because I think there's been a lot of concern about historic tax credits going to non-historic communities. And that's the reason that you have section 17. Sorry. Maybe going a little bit too fast for my own good. Yes, section 17 on the bottom of page 25 was a section that we had worked out with all those partners to really make clear that the tax credits should only be used in centers with historic properties. And so you'll see, if you look at that, it says applications in step 2 and 3 centers, they have to have historic already. And then step one centers where there is a portion that is historic. So step one could get to the historic tax credits if they had historic properties. So it's kind of a little bit of the flip of what was just recently proposed yesterday. From our view, and I don't want to speak for the partners that we were working with, but we felt like we had gotten to a place that made sense. We have some centers that aren't historic that we should support. And then we have historic centers, and those should be the ones that get the historic tax credits because those are limited resources. We want to direct them properly. I'm hoping all that made sense. Happy to take questions. And
Can you summarize for us the different benefits of the steps?
the steps. Nice test. Sorry, I really only focused on the step one benefits. The step one benefits are technical assistance and grant priority. So that's all step one gets. And so that's helpful. Like if you're trying to relocate your village center out outside the floodplain, like you want some technical assistance from typically the state or the RPC, and you also want to be able to qualify for, whether it's a planning grant or a grant to do, wastewater. So technical assistance and grant priority is all you get for step one. And then step two is where the historic tax credits kick in. And then, sorry, I didn't focus in on the benefits for step 2 and 3, but there are obviously more of the historic tax credits. There's other programs, and even other tax credits, I think, that are available to those step 2 and 3 centers.
I think we're trying to understand as we were in Act 181 trying to actually move away from the community investment program designations being used so much for land use decisions. So that, and I guess the way you see it, I'd like to hear how you see this happening.
Yeah, I think we see it more as, to go backwards in time, like how did we get here? Like, why are these tied together now? There was for the designation program, the way it used to work is a town would negotiate their area for the designation with the staff at Department of Housing Community Development, and then get it approved by the Community Investment Board or the Downtown Board, it was called then. When there was a survey, you may remember this during 2023, there was a study and a lot of surveying, big workshop at Vermont Tech College, getting feedback from towns like, how is the designation program working for you? And what should we do to change it? One of the big things that came out of that process was a lot of frustration with the mapping negotiation one by one with the state. And so the solution that got proposed to this committee 2 years ago was, while the RPCs are doing future land use maps, okay, and we won't talk about the Act 250 benefit, like that was one angle. The other angle was, let's have the RPCs work with the towns and do region-wide mapping of all of these centers and the neighborhoods around them. And so the centers and neighborhoods tie into our future land use areas so that the towns aren't as frustrated negotiating. We're kind of supporting the towns rather than regulating, controlling them in the way that they were feeling the program was working. So I think it was really trying to shift the whole dynamic from control to support. And so that's what we feel like we've been doing. Now, one of the implications of that is that there's more centers being identified and more land area. So just to acknowledge that, but that was also, it's still, 2.5% of the state. The old designations were 0.3. And one of the frustrations also with the designation program previously was that it was only 0.3% of the state. And so those designations were being used to prioritize grants and things in different agencies. And there were definitely towns and parts of towns that were feeling like they were getting left out. That felt like this is where we're trying to plan growth and we're not being supported properly. So sorry, that may be a longer answer than you were looking for.
One of the concerns we have is that there's limited resources to support the towns in
Agreed.
doing this work. And so if we increasing both the land area and and all of the areas, there's like, well, how do we do that? How do we address that?
Well, sorry, were you done with your question?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I actually, again, I think we've been thinking it on the flip side, because when we're working with our towns on these maps, we aren't, we're not expanding what the town is doing. The town already has a town plan in place. Like, we're supporting what the town has already determined locally where they want to grow and how they want to grow. So we don't see the demand for more work. These things are already in process at the town level. And sorry, this points to a larger.
Looking at state resources available to help the towns, like even
Yes.
step one that you just described, technical assistance from the state.
And RPCs.
Grant, okay, and RPCs, and grant priority, so there's limited resources there.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I think one of the things that, and this is, I haven't necessarily had this conversation with all my peers, but one of the things that this process has pointed out is the state connection to the town planning process has been virtually non-existent. And so this, in my mind, is a really constructive thing that we're doing to support all of the towns in the state. Like, whatever level of planning and work that they want to do to support growth in their town. Some towns don't want to grow at all. That's fine. They don't have a growth area. Other towns are doing more where they want to have some growth. This is really just supporting what the towns are doing. And we're providing a lot of technical assistance to those towns on the plans, on their bylaws, helping apply for grants or working on funding things. I mean, I think you passed CHIP last year in part to address this financing and financial resources to implement plans, right? So from my view, a lot of these things are coming together to support what towns have been doing, and we're recognizing more of what towns are doing.
Do members have further questions on this topic?
Last point, I think you may have gotten a request. We also think that it's a great idea to have the Community Investment Board report back to you on how are things happening, how are things, the tax credits of the various incentives that they are in charge of, how are they being used? Are they landing in the right places to modify something if it is working, after you hear back, but.
Representative North.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Charlie, for coming in this morning. So if we remove the yellow highlighted additions that you're talking about wanting to remove, would that have the effect of increasing the applicant pool for these same funds, the CIP funds?
No, I think that just keeps the process that's in the things that are in process keep staying in process.
In other words, if we left the yellow in there, it would actually shrink the applicant pool.
Yes.
What you're suggesting by taking these yellow additions back out, so we just continue with status quo, keeping the applicant pool for that same set of funds where it is current.
Yeah, given the mapping that we're doing with them now. Yeah.
Clarifying though, the sort of post-Act 181.
Yeah.
So it's still,
Currently,
and it hasn't expanded yet.
Because
I know you think you've mapped them, so you feel like it's done. I appreciate that.
Well, in process.
You're in process. And so this is, that applicant pool has not expanded yet.
That's true. Yeah, until they're formally approved by the.
one going into place.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's really, the first plan has been submitted to the Land Use Review Board, from the Northwest region. They submitted maybe a few weeks ago now. So they're under review by the LURB. Rutland and Chittenden regions are going to be submitting in May. And I think this language would, I think, disrupt those approval processes and kind of cause us to go back to work with towns and remap. And I think it would be smaller geography and disruption. And I mean, honestly, there's been so much public concern with other provisions of 181. If we don't have to, I'd rather not kick this particular part of it.
My line of questioning there. So given that prior to Act 181 implementation actually going into place and the plans that are in process actually going into place, the applicant pool is smaller than what it will be when the plans all go into place. So they're effectively over time, given the implementation of Act 181, if these yellow additions are removed, the applicant pool will have grown
Yeah, we'll have grown from pre-Act 181.
Uh, and will include towns that are already in process through the planning, RPC planning process. And so if we implemented the yellow highlighted text and left it in there, you'd have to go back and take some towns out that are already going through the process. And when we say already going through the process, does that mean already going through the process of applying for CIP benefits?
No, I think it really has to do with our map and the expectations that we've been working through with our towns. And I think, I think one of the first of my peers to call me was Tasha in Lamoille, who, was working with Johnson on relocating their village outside the floodplain. And she was like, oh my God, like what's happening? Like if they do this, I'm concerned that then Johnson doesn't qualify and Johnson needs help.
So they are going through the process with the expectation of being able.
That's
to
right.
apply.
Yeah, because we've been talking to them for a year and a half. And unfortunately, building some level of
on the rug out from under their feet if we left the yellow language.
Yeah, that's what we're concerned about.
I guess it's interesting. I didn't think it would change the mapping of the areas at all. I don't understand that. It doesn't.
It makes any of these centers that don't have historic properties ineligible to be a center. It says that only centers containing buildings that are eligible for the register qualify for benefits.
I guess that was more linked than.
And I think maybe it was trying to get to the historic tax credits, maybe, I don't know.
Yes.
And that's what we were trying to address in section 17, which does that.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
Representative Ted Levy, did you?
I like the idea of this being removed. If we're trying to encourage growth outside of areas we know are prone to flooding, I know some of these areas that have historic buildings, but if the ultimate goal is to have growth outside or adjacent to flood-prone areas, removing this is going to hopefully encourage that. That's why the yellow highlighted stuff to me needs to be strong.
Representative Chapin.
I totally agree that we want to be encouraging municipalities, particularly rural ones, have seen flooding in their only village or two, and really do need to look at different areas. I think that's very compelling. The other compelling testimony that we've received is that right now, the limited grant funds that step one, my understanding is the grant funds that step one makes folks prioritized for is a limited pool of grant funds. And without the yellow language, going back to the way the bill was, the way Act 181 has been rolling out, many more particularly urban areas are going to be eligible for that. It was articulated to us that really these funds have been utilized in fairly focused, particularly for rural economic development purposes. And without this yellow language, to sort of maintain those resources directed at more rural economic development, a lot of urban areas are now, after this mapping, going to be eligible and potentially, really pull a lot of those resources. So I guess I just wondered.
I think there's other ways that state agencies and maybe the legislature have put some guardrails in place there. I mean, there's been some geographic anti-Chittenden investment policies that have been in place for a number of years. So sorry, I'm just naming that maybe more bluntly than I should. I know we're at time. But there are other ways to deal with that than excluding entire towns or villages from being eligible. And yeah, because those agencies are making decisions, they're doing some weighing of interests there when they're making decisions. So, but excluding them feels like the wrong message. And I think we're very concerned about this and the conversations that we're going to have if this goes into effect.
I think you made your point well, and I want to be aware of the time.
Yeah, thank you.
A couple of questions for you also.
Okay.
So we also talked about an appeal of regional plans. And I guess I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. It feels, maybe I'll leave it at that. What are like, somehow it feels like we need a way for that to happen. And right now we don't.
This is section 14 you're referring to? There's language in here now,
Yeah.
the land use review, developing a report about whether that section should stay in or be modified in some way. A couple things, we talked about appeals in the development of 181. And some of you that were on the committee 2 years ago may remember, that resulted in a process for objectors to bring objections to the LURB when they're making their final decisions. So there was kind of a process set up for that, without, going into some other legal process. So I don't know if that's sufficient or not. I'm not going to be the judge or jury on that, but so we're okay with this, but is in section 14. And there is another different section or different language, a part of section 4476 in statute that also allowed for an appeal of a regional, an RPC approval of a town plan. Maybe there's more merit there. I'm not aware of any town plans that have actually been turned down, been denied, because we're typically working with the town to make sure they comply. And so we address all those issues before we get to the approval stage. So there, maybe there's some merit there, but yeah, I'll leave it at that. I think in our decisions, I think we kind of also walk back to like, how do our decisions affect private property rights and things like that? And like our regional plan doesn't do that. Now the LURB deciding about Act 250 exemption, that does. And that's probably appealable. And then the town plan approval doesn't impact zoning or anything else. It just impacts the town's ability to do impact fees, and they get some more grant priority by having a regionally approved town plan. So anyway, we're okay with the language in section 14, if that's the question.
I don't think the LURB wanted to do it. Do you have any thoughts on who?
Well, I think it was, we were kind of struggling with the LURB being the appeal body because the LURB is the one approving our plans. So it was like, they already,
They don't even, I'm not even sure they wanted to do the study. They don't want to report. I'm just thinking like, so if not, then who?
yeah. And this section was a leftover section of statute that got, the rest of it got struck 15 years ago during challenges for change. And this was like some remnant, to my knowledge, has never been actually operationalized. I know there is a case that's under appeal, but it's never been used in the way it was constructed.
We get it.
Yeah.
Just wondering about.
I don't have a great thought for you there. Sorry.
Representative Austin.
So going back to the funding
Mhm.
that we use, how much money is it? And is it on a first come, first served basis or? Right.
I can't answer that question, and it varies depending on what happens here every year, and because it's in, grants in A&R, it's
Mhm.
grants at V-Trans, it could be grants at community in ACCD. So I definitely don't have a handle on that, and it varies year to year.
How they're allocated.
Yeah, I can't answer that either. No,
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you for your testimony.
thank you so much. I really appreciate the time.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.
All right, with that, we're going to welcome Michelle Monroe and Denise Smith. Do you want to testify together or in?
Yeah, we're gonna.
Okay, great.
It's not the next time. Okay. Thanks.
Friday night.
Did you start?
Okay, hi. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for the invitation to come and speak with you today. For the record, my name is Denise Smith, and I'm the current Executive Director of the Vermont Council on Rural Development, otherwise known as VCRD. We are the state's Rural Development Council, authorized in the Farm Bill, and serve as a nonpartisan convener of public, private, and nonprofit partners to align resources, elevate local priorities, and strengthen rural economies. You heard from Paul Costello last week. I was out of town, but was able to watch it. The previous executive director of VCRD. VCRD, as you heard from him, has overseen a number of statewide rural policy convenings on a variety of issues, including broadband, the creative economy, climate economy, and working lands. The most recent statewide policy councils we have facilitated were the Vermont Proposition, and most recently was the Vermont Youth Opportunity Initiative. In addition to statewide rural policy work, you might know us better for our community visit process that we host throughout the state, which is locally led, community-driven processes in rural communities. We're proud to say that in 2027, we're celebrating our 30th year of doing that work. And we've worked across the state in every region and have been in over 100 towns. Today, I'm here to reiterate that VCRD continues to serve Vermont and Vermonters with what we are known for and do best, which is community engagement and implementation processes that lead to democratic, locally driven decision-making by the people most impacted by those decisions. In fact, VCRD is deeply nonpartisan, which means we are a trusted, neutral convener that serves all of Vermont. You can look at our board structure if that's helpful to see who serves on our board. We facilitate open, respectful, inclusive dialogue and support community-driven outcomes without prescribing solutions. Our work reflects the community priorities and approaches. In addition, VCRD for years since its inception has been engaged with the Rural Caucus. Since its inception, we have provided testimony, expertise, and oftentimes are called upon to reflect the voice of rural communities and the challenges that they are facing. And this year we've had a front row seat, as many of you, to how rural Vermonters are responding to the rulemaking process of Act 181, particularly Tier 3. We are also keenly aware of the work that is happening in this building by the Senate and House to address those concerns and provide Vermonters with more time and opportunities to weigh in. Having worked with Vermonters and Vermont communities for over 3 decades, we understand the need to engage people in transparent, facilitated conversations that honor their individual and collective voices, encourage solution, action-oriented decision-making, and provide recommendations, actions, or policy recommendations on how to move forward. And what we think now, which we're happy that this is being considered by this body, is that a transparent public engagement process that gathers the ideas of Vermonters on this central question on how to balance protection of natural resources in the midst of climate change while ensuring secure, economically viable future for our working lands, the families who work on them, and our rural communities is essential if Vermont is to move forward together. This should be facilitated in an open and neutral way, focused on getting Vermonters' input into the future of their communities, working lands, and natural resources.
Okay. Thanks, Denise. I am Michelle Monroe. I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont Association of Conservation Districts, for the record. And before I start some of my other testimony, unfortunately, I meant to send this late last night and forgot to attach it, but you all will have a memo from us outlining sort of the legal basis for us doing this work. As Denise cited, VCRD is in Title VII of federal statute as a state conservation or rural development council that is explicitly charged with this kind of public convening in federal law. And that same title also charges districts with doing local convenings around conservation issues. And then districts are also in 10 VSA 723 as charged with developing comprehensive plans for the protection and conservation of natural resources. So I just wanted to lay out that there is a statutory basis as well as an expertise basis for us coming forward to do this work. So as I mentioned in my last testimony before you, we conservation districts understand our working lands. We provide technical assistance to farmers and forest landowners all across the state of Vermont. We sit at their kitchen tables, helping them find ways to improve their operations and protect the landscape for their own benefit and the benefit of all of us. That makes districts trusted partners who can help bring people to the conversation. And when VCRD engages in their community visit process. Thank you. In the community visit process, one of the things that they do first is find those local partners who can bring people to the table who know who in the community really needs to be part of the discussion. And when it comes to these issues, that's conservation districts, which is why we're proposing this partnership that would draw on their BCRD's expertise and our local knowledge. So at the same time that we're sitting down with people to help them figure out how to make their farm or their forest business more viable, we're also conservationists doing boots on the ground conservation work in every corner of Vermont. We mitigate flooding, we protect wildlife habitat, we improve soil health, we do a whole wide range. If it's a conservation project, chances are we're doing it. And as I mentioned, we're charged in federal and state statute with gathering information on conservation priorities and needs in each area of the state. When we do that annually. And so we know that conservation and protection of natural resources is one of the defining values that Vermonters hold in common. And we bring combining VCRD's expertise in neutral facilitation and public engagement with our local relationships and understanding of the complexities of combining conservation with a working landscape will result in a robust public process that can hopefully provide the legislature with insight into how Vermonters see the future of land use in our rural communities and how together we can turn vision and values into good policy. As non-regulatory entities, districts believe it is important to approach these discussions not with a regulatory lens, but with genuine curiosity about Vermonters' conservation priorities and how they believe those priorities can best be achieved, including the protection of our working lands. We're happy to take questions, or we had some other thoughts as well.
So the current language we're looking at really is just not really asking for a plan to happen, but for the development of a plan to happen, excuse me, not for it to be implemented. And so I just want to make sure that's where you're at, because there's been a little bit of confusion.
Was that the March 27th deadline to have a plan developed by then? Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, because we were confused and thinking like, are they expecting all of this work to be done by March
No.
27? Because that would not be.
Not at all. And in fact, what we're imagining is having folks like you actually just work on the framework.
Okay.
And then it would be implemented. So kind of taking our time to do this well.
We would agree that absolutely that needs to happen, because it certainly is scary for Vermonters. Their land is maybe their only asset. It's something that's been in their family for generations, and now there's a lot of fear around someone telling them what they can and can't do with that asset, and it's the only thing of value that they have. So I think it behooves the legislature to take time and do this in a really engaged way with the public. I know that we do worry about sort of like, I think that the land use review board may be a scary thing for some folks at this point. So I just want to be cautious about how involved they get in this process, just for that reason, I think. Just not because we have anything against the land use review board, but just, I think it can be.
I think the intention is not that they are the vehicle for getting this back to us. Representative Logan.
Yeah, and I guess just to put that differently, the expectation would be that whoever is elected to develop this plan that then comes back to the legislature for review next year would then conduct that outreach process. So not an outreach process for the land use review board, but an outreach process the land use review board contracts with an NGO to complete, or NGOs.
Representative Chapin.
So I guess I'd love to, I think we were very inspired by Paul's last week, and it was in line with sort of at least what I personally was thinking. I was critically involved in some of VCRD's work 15, 20 years ago that led to the creation of programs that I helped run. So like I'm sort of familiar with how VCRD sort of can be a partner to the government, but also is a separate entity. So I guess and so as we were looking at Section 8 in the bill and trying to craft something, it wasn't essential to me that it went through the LURB. It really, in my mind, Section 8 is about the legislature ensuring a public engagement process for information that comes back to the legislature that is well beyond Act 250 and the LURB's purview, and may inform our future tweaking of that work, but really is meant to inform the legislature about regulatory, non-regulatory tools, like how do Vermonters think we should be, like, what are the issues that play in around these critical natural resources, from agricultural soils to wildlife corridors, and a number of things that are not well enough, we know are not well enough protected right now for the future of Vermont. So, how do we, what I think our committee is trying to struggle with here is, how do we get what we want as a legislature, which is a robust public process that addresses a lot of the issues that have come up over the last year, and can inform us about things we might think about in the future? And where's the LURB fit in or not fit into that? So I think what you just said, and it's a little bit clearer in your memo, is that there is a legal framework here for us to just ask you to do this work through the districts.
Yes.
We do fund you directly already and we can in statute say, you do this. So I think you're proposing that Section 8 should just shift to us saying to you, your organization, or both your organizations, naming you in statute and giving you the authority and the funds to develop a framework for us that then you would also propose to implement yourselves or offer to implement yourselves. And I'm interested in moving that March date to January so that we have all session next year to do a thoughtful legislative process to look at a major public engagement framework implementing that. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear.
Representative Rogan.
So one of the things that we've been discussing is the community engagement plans that covered agencies are required to complete by next July, that indicate how their community engagement processes would align with Act 154, the environmental justice law. And the conservation districts aren't covered agencies. The land use review board is a covered agency. And that is one of the reasons why I'm more comfortable with this process sort of being under the umbrella of the land use review board, because it would then require that the community engagement process developed would be in alignment with community engagement principles that have been outlined already through the Environmental Justice Advisory Council and Interagency Council. Those have already been developed. The covered agencies are required to create community engagement, essentially processes, policies that they'll use when they're developing policy, for example, that would have any impact on environmental justice focused populations, including land, access to land, housing, clean air, water, et cetera. So it seemed, I'm curious as to how aware you both are about the process of developing these environmental justice policies in the state, and how comfortable you would be with more deeply engaging.
I mean, council has a representative, the National Resources Conservation Council, which is in statute, it's described as a state agency. So there are all of these questions because it's never functioned the way like the Agency of Agriculture does, for example. And for years it was staffed by the state. And so there are all of these legal questions that we're constantly trying to get resolved about what is the precise, what state rules apply to council and which ones do not. But council is the umbrella organization that is charged with actually making sure that districts follow Title X. And they are also, they hold multiple block grants on behalf of the state that they distribute to, mainly clean water funding. So there's all kinds of questions around how much that applies to us, but council does have a appointed representative on the Environmental Justice Committee. That is
Your agency.
Yes,
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
So we have an appointed member there. I personally have not been following that closely, but I think that good public engagement process always reaches out to include everyone in the community. And I know VCRD has been working with different community groups to meet folks to engage people who may not be comfortable at a broader public meeting. And I think Denise can speak to that.
Yeah, so a few years ago, prior to me joining BCRD, we developed justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion statements, or processes that are part of our global processes for how we do our work to ensure that we're collecting and getting voices from people that might not normally feel heard. So from our marginalized voices in the state of Vermont. And we continue to improve that process and develop more robust systems in the organization to be able to gather, to meet people where they're at, basically, is kind of how we say it. And, to the point where we're translating documents. We're just in New Haven, where there's a large migrant farming population. And so we had a lot of translated documents for that. And we're working in Brandon. We're actually meeting Brandon tomorrow to start our community visit process there. And we're doing specific focus groups after the planning meeting where they identified populations that might not be able to come to public meetings. So that's one of the things that we do. Again, I have not followed the environmental justice of the rules around the LURB, but we would, as long as it's a neutral process, VCRD can help, I guess is what I'll say, as long as there's not an expected outcome, right? And that you're really interested in the voices of Vermonters. As Paul kind of shared, that the transparent process that we provide, the making sure that we have the goals, that people understand why they're coming to the meeting and what's going to happen with the information that we're collecting at these meetings.
Just a quick follow-up question. And so thank you, first of all, for that answer. So one of the goals of Act 154 is to, for example, make sure that there's meaningful participation in public process by Vermonters at 80% AMI or below. So I think that's one of the issues that we've experienced over the last several months is a concern from lower income rural Vermonters that they're being priced out of having the ability to use their own land. And so I'm particularly interested in how you might, and I realize this question is coming sort of out of left field, how you might gauge lower income Vermonters, landowners, lower income landowners in this process.
I think that that's actually something that we both do on a regular basis because we're working with people who, the districts are directly working with people who are really, in many cases, economically challenged in terms of how they can make a living off of the land that they own. And generally have a principle of trying to engage everyone, but in the communities when they're inviting people in and wanting to hear, but it's around different issues. So we're really focused on that conservation piece when we're engaging the public. So we aren't necessarily getting to things like the housing crisis. But I think that VCRD has a really robust process for making sure that everyone is at the table.
Yeah, I mean, I think our record shows that we get 10% of a community typically to show up to any one of our community visits. So, which is a large number. It's typically more than who show up for a town meeting day. And we do a lot of outreach, a lot of phone call. I guess I would say like our biggest thing still is calling neighbors and inviting them to come to a meeting or to an event. I think also messaging is going to be really important. And that's something that we have a lot of skill around in terms of how we talk to Vermonters and invite them to the table. And I also think that just, the way we show up is really authentic. We're very authentic in our, we're Vermonters serving Vermonters, so we're not an outside consulting firm. And I think that's a really important kind of ethos that we bring. And the other thing that we talk about really is like, we work in rural communities around the state and have been doing this for 30 years. And so our knowledge of the towns that we've worked in and the people that are there is deep. And so it's easy for us to call people up and ask them who isn't at the table that needs to come, and make sure that we have an outreach plan for that. So, yeah, I think there's different ways to do that. And I also think like part of the process would be to help us identify those ways that we would do that in each of the regions that we would potentially do this work in.
And I would just add that that has been one of our concerns, right? Was I'm just going to say the word, the class aspects of some of these processes, and our concern has been wanting to make sure that all Vermonters' voices were heard. That's one of the reasons that we wanted to engage in these discussions. And as in my previous role with Senator Welch, I did a lot of my role. One of my areas of focus was municipalities and big flooding. So I joined VCRD's processes in both Barry and Johnson on behalf of the senator. And those were very much engaging all members of the community. It was really valuable because there was no one who was left out. So just what I've observed of the VCRD's process.
Representative Austin.
Yeah. Coming from Chittenden County.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, because I think it's kind of a different, it would be a different process with, 73,000 people, 10% of that is like 7,000 or whatever. So, just the economic piece of Chittenden County and its relationship to Vermont and businesses, it's a very different piece of Vermont. And so when you come from when you're saying in terms of rural, how will you get the input from Chittenden County as well?
It's a great question. I have not thought deeply about that. So I think that could be definitely something that we could follow up on. Yeah.
Art Wolf has written a really excellent economic report on, Vermont, but Chittenden County specifically, and that would help to inform how you would want to structure the process.
It's great. Thank you.
And I know the Winooski district covers Chittenden County, and I have no doubt that Dan will also have thoughts and the partners that he would encourage us to invite. And that he would know of people who know people, as well as people we want to talk to, and people who will know the people we want to talk to. Yes, absolutely engage with the RPC.
Yeah, Charlie's great. Interesting.
Members have further questions? Representative Chapin.
It would help me if you would take a close look at section 8 in the bill and look at the language, particularly the questions that we have outlined.
Glad it's in here.
And also, like, it would be helpful for us to have an estimate of what it might cost to do the work between now and January to develop a framework for an outreach engagement.
We can do that. Well, to follow up on that question, so for the cost for the outreach and the developing the plan and then actually implementing the plan is separate.
Yes, that would be dealt with by a future legislature next year.
That would be dealt with by the future legislature next
This
year.
would just be we would be asking for and paying for the development of the plan between now and next January.
Okay.
March, depending on the date.
You want to wait and provide that written?
Yeah, I did create some more positive VCRD's style is to ask open-ended questions in a positive framing. So I did take some of the language of the questions that you had and developed a few different ones. So happy to share those with you after. Yeah, I
That'd be
mean,
great.
this is like
You can email that.
very
out.
quick brainstorming, not like these would be the questions, but at least to kind of think a little bit more about them so that that's one thing we did have concerns about was the way the questions were worded in the bill right now.
Would love your feedback and
Okay,
stuff.
great, absolutely, we can
Yeah.
do that. Thank you so much and thanks for the work
Thank
that
you.
you're doing and for considering this.
Yeah, we appreciate it and happy to answer any more questions at any point, and we will follow up with the information you requested.
Great, thank you. Right, members, we've taken a fair amount of testimony. We're gonna, I'm going to, sit down with Ellen, and come up with the next draft and get it to us for this afternoon. Can spend a fair amount of time. I would count on a long afternoon. And hopefully we're moving in on it and you want to bring your thoughts to me. That's fine. Great. With that, we will adjourn for the morning.